The Nikon Z7. Is it Z camera to have?
First, why don't you tell them why everybody else has their review out, but we still haven't published it?
Because we were sad, because we had some criticisms that nobody else had, and then we got scared, and then we had an existential crisis.
Yeah, we've been stressed about it.
I'm stressed.
First we decided we'll talk about it on the drive home from New York, and then we're like, no, we better just sleep on it. And then like all morning we've been like, I don't want to do this.
I don't want to do it. I don't like to do reviews where I'm not excited. It's so easy to make an exciting review. You say what everyone wants to hear and everyone's happy with you. And now I have to make a review where I know it's true to me, but I can't read my comments.
Our allegiance is to the consumer. I do not want somebody to watch my review and buy a camera and then not be happy with it. And that's often why we're critical about things that other people are not so critical about, because we take that responsibility very seriously. With that said, we have to disclose that there was a Nikon press event. They brought people out from all over the world. We didn't partake in the hotel or meals, but lots of other press did, and this is completely common in the industry. It's been going on for decades, and all camera manufacturers, Canon, Olympus, Sony, Fujifilm.
One more thing. This is not our final review. For several reasons. We had a pre-production copy of the camera, and we also can't be certain our results were exact because the lighting and the environment that we were in, not good.
They gave it to us for 1 hour and we couldn't go outside. If you want to know the basics of it, megapixels, all that, go to here. In a nutshell, $3,400, 45 megapixels, 4K 30. It is essentially marketed as a mirrorless D850, and that was not
That's
our
what they told
experience.
me.
Let's start with the controls. Did it feel like a Nikon?
The way it feels in the hand, the deeper grip, some of the button placement, the menu system feels very familiar. The buttons, to me, still had that whole mirrorless thing, like when people made fun of Sony for having fiddly little buttons, including us. Like, they didn't have that same solid feel to me. They felt a little bit different.
It had a mode dial like a lower end Nikon.
It wasn't.
It didn't have the secondary single continuous high, continuous timer. It didn't have a separate dial. I missed that. It was not a D850. It did not have the lighted buttons, which are incredibly useful at night.
I like the lighted buttons when I'm doing night photography.
It didn't have this row of buttons on the left side, which is really useful. Like, that's how we rate pictures, and it makes reviewing things really much faster. The top screen, however, was nice and better.
It was a nice top screen. And the back screen was also big.
The touchscreen worked okay. Image quality, we can't really comment on it.
It's a pre-production copy of the camera. The EVF, they really hyped up the EVF. Like, I was like, what the EVF is even going to happen when I try this thing, I love when I say things like that. But they really did. They were like, it's so good. The engineers, their favorite thing was the EVF. And I used it and I was like, yeah, this is nice.
It's fun.
It's just like every other high-end EVF. I didn't notice a difference.
Memory card.
Everyone is hitching about the memory card. There's one card slot and it's an XQD card slot. Are you okay?
I'm upset about the memory card thing. I can't recommend it to wedding photographers. Are you willing to take the gamble that you might lose all your shots?
Video.
I felt like the video focusing was quite a bit better. And of course I can use the electronic viewfinder when recording video, which I can't do on the D850. So those are big pluses. 4K 30 doesn't blow us away, but it's on par with what comes out with Sony. It can do 120 at 1080p, crops down to DX. So there's an optional crop with 4K or a mandatory crop if you're recording in 120, which is frustrating because it totally changes the focal length, and it meant, I want to record high speed. I now need to move way back or change lenses or something.
It has the tilty screen, but not the screen that flips around so that you can see yourself,
which
like
is
we're
what
doing
we're using
now.
right now.
So it's not going to be a vlogging camera.
But video focusing was okay. It would find faces and focus on them. And if I touched the screen, I found it better just to touch the screen because the face detect wasn't reliable. But I touched the screen and it would pull into focus and it looked smooth. It was like almost Canon levels of smooth and usable. But it did wander around more than I found that Canons do. Lenses.
We had 3 lenses out. I was shooting with the 24-70 f4 mostly. Pretty disappointed that it wasn't a 2.8.
That'll be out next year.
That'll be out next year. They have a good lens line out coming up. Also, they have a really good adapter, the F to Z adapter. So you can use all of your old lenses on this new mirrorless camera. I think that's a huge selling point. That was extremely smart of them. I think that's really exciting. If you're going to be one of the first people into the Nikon mirrorless system, you don't have to ditch all of your old gear. Everything else will be compatible. That having been said, they have a 50mm 1.8. It is $850.
Their current F mount costs $200. So that's a big leap. And if we're going to pay $850 for a 50 millimeter, we'd want it to be an f1.4. And the 35 f1.8 is $600.
I feel like they had to have these expensive lenses so that they could make the body somewhat in the ballpark of the other mirrorless cameras. It's pretty jarring, but they do have the adapter, so you can still get cheaper glass and even use vintage glass, which is very cool.
I was not blown away by the 24-70 f4. 35, the sharpness looked fantastic.
I like the 35. I got some pictures of you with that, and it focused really nicely.
What about the build quality?
All the lenses felt kind of like light and airy to me. Focusing, this is the part that kept me up at night, and this is the reason I will not be reading comments over the weekend. It was rough. It was just rough. They promised me my D850 in a mirrorless form, and that was not my experience. Was it because it was pre-production? Possibly. I did contact other people that had used the camera, and they had similar experiences, but their models were also pre-production models. A lot of hunting. I had Tony walk towards me, use continuous focusing mode, missed a lot of shots, which is something that doesn't happen to me with the D850.
Most of the shots.
Most of the shots. The lighting was very poor in the room that we were in, and we were not allowed to go outside with the camera. So we have to retest it. I was really disappointed, and I hate to have to be critical in a review. I know that the engineers worked really hard. I'm so excited that Nikon is moving in this direction, and I hope this can all be fixed with firmware updates, but I can't just not report that this was a really big problem for me.
Having used just about every mirrorless camera, I would compare this to a previous generation mirrorless camera from Sony or Fuji. It focused like the X-T1 or the A7R II, which is to say, in good conditions, good light with group focusing, lots of points, it works. But when you need to like use a single point and focus on the eye, which you would if you're shooting with shallow depth of field, which is something pros do often and constantly, it was inconsistent and unreliable. And in fact, it missed focus most of the time. Even at under the modeling lights that they had set up, continuous modeling lights, shooting at like ISO 800, so not too dim.
So low,
it missed most of the time.
It was worse in low light, and it was better in high contrast, better lighting.
Yeah, in low light, it was frustrating, which is what we experienced 3 years ago with mirrorless cameras. It just doesn't compare to the Sony A7R III or Sony A7 III in my experience.
So I thought about this a lot, and does that mean that you should be scared of Nikon mirrorless? Absolutely not. They can have firmware updates. I'm really hoping that they're going to be updating frequently and not doing their usual cycle where they come out with a camera every 2 or 3 years. I don't think that's going to work for them. You
can select a focusing point with the thumbstick, and we found that to be frustrating because it has so many focusing points.
That's awesome. It has a ton of focusing points.
But it doesn't have eye detect. And eye detect would find the eye and focus on it if you're shooting a person. And here, if we recomposed or the person moved, we had to move the thumbstick, and it could take several seconds to get from one side to the other.
So that's with a small focusing point. If you're using a larger focusing point, obviously you can go to a larger part where shooting people of their face, and it's easier.
But then it focuses on their forehead or their nose or something.
Or their eyelash instead of their eye, or their forehead instead of their eye. So
if you're shooting at f8, it doesn't matter. But if you're at 200 f2.8, it matters a lot. Metering. On my D850, on the Sony A7R III, they will find faces and meter around the faces. That was not my experience with this camera. We shot a model against a white background, and it made the white background middle gray, and it made the model's face almost completely dark. You have an EVF, what you see is what you get. You can see a histogram in the viewfinder, that's great, but you're gonna be on that exposure compensation dial more than you would other professional grade cameras.
So that's an adjustment to make. Firmware updates.
Frames per second, they advertise that this Z7 did set a 9 frames per second, but that is their like continuous high extended, and it came with a huge sacrifice. Lag was maybe like a quarter of a second.
It was pretty drastic.
The person pretty quickly went out of the frame because you were seeing in the past. So you can get a real-time view if you drop it down to, our test came up with between 5 and 6 frames per second, and that was much better. Focusing was still unreliable, but at least you saw a real-time feed. But 5 or 6 frames per second is actually pretty slow. Like the D850 here does 7 frames per second. Sensor stabilization, it has it. That's great. That's kind of a requirement. That means you can put on unstabilized lenses like all your old f-mount primes, and they will be stabilized to some extent. I found unstabilized f-mount lenses didn't stabilize very well. At -2 stops from the reciprocal rule, I was getting only about 30% in focus, and at -4.5 stops, I didn't get any in focus.
Yeah.
With the stabilized f-mount lens, I was getting about half in focus at -4.5 stops, and about 10% in focus at below 5 stops reciprocal roll. So it's better with stabilized VR lenses. It's not great with unstabilized VR lenses in this initial test. Again, maybe this is something they can improve with a firmware update.
It's also pre-production.
By comparison, the Sony A7R III with the Sony 7200 GM, and at the same focal length and the same lighting, I was getting -7 to -8 stops below the reciprocal roll. So that hybrid combination was working much better, but that's also with native, not adapted lenses. But there are no native 70-200s available for it, so what was I going to do?
Yeah.
What should people take away?
The autofocusing, we had a little trouble with it. I did not feel that it was a mirrorless version of the D850. The D850 is definitely better at focusing. But the positives are, if you want to go into a mirrorless system and you have a ton of Nikon gear, glass, flashes, and everything, this is a way to possibly even keep your DSLR, have a mirrorless body, and still put all of those lenses on your new body.
I'm going to continue to use the D850.
Yeah, me too. But would you recommend someone sell all of their Nikon stuff and completely switch systems when it's like so new? It's so new.
If they have to have mirrorless today, I would not recommend this camera. If you don't want to sell all your lenses, then I would just keep shooting with your DSLR for another year and let Nikon rev these bodies and release some more lenses.
That's our review. We give you the good and the bad, and soon, when we have a copy of the camera that's not pre-production, we'll do better testing and we'll get back to you. And if you like our input and you'd like to learn more about photography, you should check out our book, Stunning Digital Photography. It has 14 hours of video never seen before.
So check out the Art and Science of Photography video training series, 10 hours of video that will take your photography to the next level.
They can get that, so if no camera manufacturers talk to us anymore, we can still eat. I hated that review.
Yeah, that sucked.
That sucked.
That's no fun.
That's not fun. That's a bummer. I like the Nikon people so much. Did you see those 3 engineers in the back row so happy? Why do I have to poop on their dreams? I love them.
They did good.
They did a good job.
They should have started 5 years ago.
Yeah, it's not their fault.